You have 12 hours to get out. The words hit me like ice water, but I didn't flinch. I just smiled. My daughter-in-law stood there in her pressed blazer and diamond earrings, holding that eviction notice like it was a weapon she'd been sharpening for months. What she didn't know was that the woman she thought was poor and powerless was sitting on $85 million. My name is Corinne Aldridge. I'm 67 years old, and until this moment, I thought family meant protection. I was wrong. The living room buzzed with whispers. 23 neighbors and relatives had come for what they thought was a simple Sunday lunch. Instead, they got front-row seats to my public execution. My daughter-in-law had planned this perfectly, witnesses everywhere, official papers spread across my own dining table, her voice dripping with fake concern. Corinne has agreed to let go of the burden of maintaining this house, she announced, like she was doing me a favor. We've already prepared the paperwork. She'll be moving out today. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Gasps echoed around the room. Mrs. Henderson from next door dropped her teacup. My cousin Margaret's mouth fell open. But the worst part? My son, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father died, he wouldn't even look at me. Just stared at his shoes while his wife stripped away my entire life. I touched the edge of the eviction notice. Official letterhead. Legal language. My address typed in bold letters like I was already gone. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, the kind of stationery that costs more than most people's groceries. She'd spent money to make my humiliation look professional. The house needs updating, she continued, her voice smooth as silk. And honestly, it's too much for someone Corinne's age to handle alone. We found her a lovely little apartment across town. Much more suitable. Suitable. Like I was a piece of furniture that didn't match her decor anymore. The room felt smaller with every word. 23 pairs of eyes staring at me, waiting for me to break down, to beg, to make a scene. That's what she wanted. The crazy old woman losing her mind, proving she was right to kick me out. But I'd learned something important in my 67 years. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. So I smiled wider. How thoughtful, I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. You've thought of everything. She blinked, clearly expecting tears or screaming. Instead, I folded the eviction notice in half, then in half again, creasing it carefully like I was making a paper airplane. The silence stretched until people started shifting in their chairs. My son finally looked up. Guilt burned across his face, but his mouth stayed shut. 28 years old and still letting his wife do his talking. I'd raised him better than that, but apparently marriage had erased my lessons. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked louder than usual. Or maybe everything else had gone quiet. I could smell the lemon polish I'd used on that clock for 30 years, back when this house was mine and my late husband's, before lawyers and wills made everything complicated. Well, my daughter-in-law said, her confidence flickering for just a second. I'm glad you're taking this so well. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress. Every eye in the room followed me as I walked to the mantelpiece where our family photos sat in their silver frames. Wedding pictures. Baby photos. Christmas mornings. 30 years of memories she was about to throw away. Tell me something, I said, still facing the photos. Did you enjoy planning this? She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Corinne, I'm just trying to help. Because it must have taken weeks. I turned around, that smile still on my face. The paperwork. The timing. Getting everyone here to watch. You've been very thorough. The room held its breath. Even the clock seemed to pause. But what she didn't realize was that thorough people leave paper trails. And paper trails can be followed both ways. While she'd been busy planning my exit, she had no idea I'd been quietly preparing for wolves like her my entire life. My late husband always told me, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Well, she'd just shown me exactly who she was. And now it was time for her to discover who I really was. Before I reveal what happened next and how this story unfolds, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good comeback story, and subscribe because you're going to want to see how this ends. Trust me, she had no idea what she'd just started. What happens when the person you're trying to destroy has been secretly building an empire you never knew existed? The front door closed with a sound like thunder. 23 witnesses to my humiliation scattered like leaves, their whispered conversations trailing behind them into the evening air. My son left without saying goodbye. His wife didn't even look back. And then there was silence. I stood in my living room, or what used to be my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of 30 years. The grandfather clock ticked so loud it hurt my ears. Dust particles floated through the lamplight like tiny dancers mocking my loneliness. Even the smell of lemon polish, once my comfort, now felt like a stranger's perfume in someone else's house. I made tea because that's what you do when your world ends on a Sunday afternoon. But when I lifted the cup, my hands shook for the first time all day. The Earl Grey tasted like ash and broken promises. The photographs on the mantelpiece stared down at me with their frozen smiles. My wedding day, when Frank promised to love and protect me forever. My baby boy taking his first steps in this very room. Christmas mornings when we were a real family, before death and greed tore us apart. I touched my husband's face through the glass. "Frank," I whispered. "What would you do?" But Frank was gone, and I was alone with 12 hours and nowhere to go. The house creaked around me like old bones settling. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of that damn clock, the whistle of wind through the windows Frank never got around to fixing. This house held every memory I had left, and tomorrow it would belong to someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to remove. I walked through each room like I was saying goodbye to old friends. The kitchen where I taught my son to make pancakes. The study where Frank worked late nights building his business. The bedroom where we dreamed about growing old together. Now those dreams were just eviction papers and legal threats. But as I climbed the stairs to pack what little they'd allow me to take, something stirred in my memory. Frank's voice from years ago, urgent and serious. "Corinne, if anything ever happens to me, remember the cedar trunk. Everything we built, everything we sacrificed for, it's all there. Don't let anyone erase what we created together." I stopped halfway up the stairs. The cedar trunk. I hadn't thought about it in years, dismissed it as old junk my daughter-in-law always complained about. But Frank never kept junk. Every paper, every document, every receipt had a purpose. My heart started beating faster. While she'd been busy planning my exile, while she'd been forging papers and manipulating my son, she'd overlooked the most important thing of all. The truth was still here, locked away where greedy hands couldn't reach it. I climbed those stairs with purpose now, each step carrying me closer to something that might change everything. The attic door groaned open, releasing the musty smell of forgotten years. And there, covered in dust but solid as a fortress, sat the cedar trunk that held our secrets. What I found inside would prove that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. But first, I had to make sure I was right about what Frank had hidden from the world.
The cedar trunk opened with a sigh, like it had been holding its breath for years. Inside, wrapped in plastic and tied with red ribbon, were documents I'd forgotten existed. But as I lifted them into the attic light, my hands trembling with something that wasn't fear anymore, I remembered everything. Marriage certificates, business partnerships, bank statements, land deeds. And there, in Frank's careful handwriting and my own faded signature, the truth she'd tried so hard to bury. Aldridge Enterprises, founded 1987. Co-owners, Franklin James Aldridge and Corinne Marie Aldridge. Equal partners in perpetuity. I laughed out loud in that dusty attic, a sound that echoed off the rafters like a battle cry. Equal partners. Not the dependent widow she painted me as. Not the burden she claimed I'd become. I was the co-founder of everything my husband built, every brick of the empire she thought she'd inherited. The documents told a story I'd almost let myself forget. While Frank worked the public face of the business, I was the silent architect. I negotiated contracts at kitchen tables while dinner burned on the stove. I balanced books after putting our son to bed. I made the phone calls that saved deals when Frank's temper got the better of him. Every major decision had my signature beside his. Every property purchase, every partnership agreement, every expansion plan. My handwriting danced across those pages like proof that I existed, that I mattered, that I built something worth stealing. But as I read deeper, my satisfaction curdled into rage. Someone had been busy. Photocopies of these same documents, but altered. My name carefully whited out. My signatures forged to remove my ownership. Frank's name standing alone where we should have stood together. She'd tried to erase me from my own history. I found emails printed and stored, conversations between my son and his wife that made my stomach turn. The old woman doesn't understand modern business, she'd written. We need to simplify ownership. It's just paperwork, honey. She'll never know the difference. But Frank had known people like her would come eventually. That's why he kept originals. That's why every document was notarized, time-stamped, and filed in triplicate. He'd built a paper fortress around our legacy, and she tried to tear it down with amateur forgeries and family manipulation. I spread the documents across the attic floor like a general planning a war. Bank records showing my equal access to accounts she thought were closed. Property deeds with both our names in permanent ink. Corporate filings that proved my stake in every asset she'd claimed for herself. The woman who'd given me 12 hours to disappear had no idea she was stealing from someone who owned half of everything she thought was hers. But proving ownership was one thing. Proving fraud was another. These documents were 30 years old, and courts don't care about dusty papers unless someone can verify their authenticity. I needed help, the kind that comes from people who understand that truth isn't always obvious and justice isn't always fair. I needed allies who spoke the language of law and evidence, people who could turn my husband's careful preparations into weapons sharp enough to cut through lies. As I carefully rewrapped each document, my hands steady now with purpose, I realized something that made me smile in the darkness. She'd spent months planning my destruction, but she'd forgotten the most important rule of warfare: always know who you're fighting. Tomorrow, she'd discover that the poor old widow she'd thrown away was about to become the most dangerous enemy she'd ever made.
I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with Frank's old address book, running my finger down names I hadn't called in years. By dawn, I'd made my choice. First call, Miriam Cortez. Corinne. Her voice cracked with surprise. It's been too long, honey. Miriam had worked as a paralegal for 40 years before retiring, helped Frank and me navigate the legal maze when we were building our business. She was sharp as a razor and twice as cutting when people tried to pull fast ones. If anyone could smell fraud from a mile away, it was Miriam. I need help, I said simply. Someone's trying to steal everything Frank and I built. I'll be there in an hour. And Corinne? Paper speaks louder than tears. Bring everything you've got. Second call, Victor Tan. Victor was younger, a forensic digital analyst who'd helped us once when a competitor tried to steal Frank's blueprints. Quiet, methodical, and completely uninterested in family drama. He dealt in facts, metadata, and digital fingerprints that couldn't lie. Mrs. Aldridge? He sounded surprised. I heard about Frank. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, Victor. But right now, I need your expertise more than your sympathy. Someone's been altering documents, and I need to prove it. Send me everything you can scan, especially originals. Digital forensics don't care about sob stories, but they never lie about when something was created or changed. For the first time since yesterday's nightmare, I felt something besides anger and betrayal. I felt hope. Miriam arrived with her reading glasses, a yellow legal pad, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She looked exactly the same, silver hair in a tight bun, eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of no-nonsense energy that made lawyers nervous. Show me what we're dealing with, she said, spreading the documents across my dining room table. I laid out Frank's originals first, then the altered copies I'd found mixed in with them. Miriam's eyebrows climbed higher with each comparison. Oh, honey, she breathed, highlighting discrepancies with her yellow marker. This isn't just theft. This is systematic fraud. Look here, your signatures scraped off and replaced. Here, ownership percentages changed by hand. And this. She held up a property deed. Amateur hour. They didn't even match the ink color. Can we prove it in court? With the right expert testimony? Absolutely. But we need more than just document comparison. We need digital evidence, paper trails, communication records. We need to show intent to defraud, not just sloppy paperwork. That's when Victor arrived, laptop bag slung over his shoulder and the kind of focused intensity that made me understand why Frank trusted him. He didn't waste time with small talk. I've started preliminary analysis of what you scanned me, he said, opening his laptop. Whoever did this left digital footprints everywhere. Modified PDFs, altered timestamps, even email metadata that shows coordination between multiple parties. He pulled up screens full of technical data that looked like hieroglyphics to me, but Miriam leaned in with interest. See these revision dates? Victor pointed to strings of numbers. Your originals were created and locked in 1987. But these altered versions? Created 6 months ago, modified multiple times, and saved from an IP address registered to your son's home. My heart sank. My own son had helped her try to erase me. There's more, Victor continued. Email chains discussing streamlining ownership and updating outdated partnerships. She convinced your son this was just procedural, but the communications show clear intent to remove your legal standing. Miriam leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. Federal crime territory. But honey, are you sure you want to go nuclear on your own family? I thought about my son's face yesterday, how he couldn't meet my eyes while his wife destroyed me in front of our neighbors. I thought about 30 years of sacrifice reduced to 12 hours and an eviction notice. I thought about Frank's voice, don't let anyone erase what we created together. They already went nuclear on me, I said quietly. I'm just returning fire. What we discovered next would give me the ammunition to do exactly that, but first, we had to move fast before she realized her perfect crime was unraveling. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Victor's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up bank records, email threads, and digital breadcrumbs that painted a picture of calculated betrayal. Each new discovery hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to keep watching. I needed to see exactly how far they'd gone to erase me. Here's the smoking gun, Victor said, pulling up a series of bank transfers. 6 months ago, major assets started moving into shell accounts. Look at these transaction descriptions: maintenance fees, estate management, property upkeep. But the money's going to accounts controlled by your daughter-in-law. Miriam's pen scratched across her legal pad, building a timeline of theft. She's been bleeding the estate dry while convincing everyone she's taking care of business. How much are we talking about? Victor's calculator clicked rapidly. Conservative estimate? $2.7 million diverted over 6 months. I gripped the edge of the table. 2.7 million. While I'd been grieving my husband's death, trusting my son to handle the complicated business affairs, she'd been systematically stealing my inheritance and preparing to throw me out of my own home. But here's what really gets me mad, Miriam said, holding up a printed email. Look at this conversation between your son and his wife from 3 months ago. She read aloud in a voice dripping with disgust. The old woman is getting suspicious about the account changes. We need to speed up the timeline. And your son's response? Just tell her it's too complicated for her to understand. She trusts me. My vision blurred with tears I'd been holding back for 24 hours. He'd used my trust as a weapon against me. My own child, the boy I raised alone after Frank died, had betrayed me for money and a woman who saw me as nothing but an obstacle to their greed. There's more, Victor said quietly. Emails discussing your eviction. This wasn't spontaneous, Mrs. Aldridge. They've been planning your removal for months. The public humiliation, the 12-hour deadline, even the apartment they mentioned, it was all choreographed to break you down and make you disappear quietly. He pulled up another screen. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed you were exactly what they painted you as, a helpless widow who didn't understand business. They never bothered to check what you actually owned, what rights you actually had, what power you could actually wield. Miriam leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of anticipation that made her dangerous in courtrooms. The beauty is, they've documented everything. Every theft, every lie, every step of their conspiracy. They built their own prison out of emails and bank records. What can we do about it? I asked. Emergency injunction, Miriam said immediately. Freeze all assets, halt all transfers, and force them to justify every penny they've moved. We file today, get a court date within the week, and watch their whole scheme collapse. How long will it take? With evidence this clear? Days, not weeks. But Corinne, once we fire this shot, there's no taking it back. Your son is going to face criminal charges. Your daughter-in-law is looking at serious prison time. Are you prepared for that? I looked around my kitchen, the heart of the home Frank and I had built together. I thought about all the family dinners we'd shared here, all the laughter and love these walls had witnessed. Then I thought about yesterday's eviction notice, the way my son had stood silent while his wife humiliated me in front of our entire community. They made their choice, I said finally. Now I'm making mine. But even as Miriam and Victor began preparing our legal counterattack, I knew the hardest part was still coming. Because winning in court was one thing. Facing my son across a courtroom, watching him realize that his betrayal had consequences he never imagined, that was something else entirely. What I didn't know was that our first victory would come sooner than any of us expected, and it would hit them exactly where they thought they were strongest. The courthouse smelled like old paper and broken promises. Miriam walked beside me, her heels clicking against marble floors with the confidence of someone who'd fought these battles 100 times before. In her briefcase were copies of every document, every email, every piece of evidence that proved my daughter-in-law had tried to erase me from my own life. Emergency hearing, Judge Morrison's courtroom, she told me that morning. We filed the injunction at 8 a.m. By noon, everything they think they own will be frozen solid. I felt like I was floating as we entered the courtroom. After 48 hours of feeling powerless, invisible, erased from my own story, I was finally fighting back. But my hands still shook when I saw them sitting across the aisle. My son looked pale, confused, like he'd just woken up from a bad dream. His wife sat ramrod straight in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, but her usual confidence had cracks running through it. She kept checking her phone, whispering urgently to their lawyer. Judge Morrison was everything you'd want in a judge, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and completely uninterested in anyone's sob story. He'd seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable, and his job was facts, not feelings. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, looking over his reading glasses. "You're requesting an emergency freeze of all assets related to the Aldridge estate pending investigation of alleged fraud. That's a serious accusation." Miriam stood up like a gunfighter drawing her weapon. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing systematic alteration of legal documents, unauthorized transfer of assets, and conspiracy to defraud the plaintiff of her rightful inheritance." She began laying out evidence like she was building a brick wall. Original documents versus forged copies. Bank transfers disguised as legitimate fees. Email chains that revealed calculated deception. Every piece of paper, every digital trail, every lie they'd told was spread across that courtroom table like a map of betrayal. The opposing lawyer, some expensive shark in a $3,000 suit, tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, these are family matters that should be handled privately. Mrs. Aldridge is clearly confused about complex business arrangements." Judge Morrison held up his hand. "I'll determine what Mrs. Aldridge understands. Please continue, Ms. Cortez." Miriam smiled the kind of smile that made prosecutors sweat. "Your Honor, the defendants assumed the plaintiff was an ignorant widow who could be manipulated and discarded. What they failed to research was that she co-founded every business they're trying to steal." She handed the judge Frank's original partnership agreements, the ones with my signature bold and clear beside his. "Equal partners since 1987. Not a dependent wife. Not a burden to be managed. An equal owner of everything they've systematically stolen." I watched my daughter-in-law's face crumble as the judge examined document after document. Her phone buzzed constantly, probably panicked calls from banks and business partners wondering why accounts were suddenly locked. The empire she thought she'd conquered was slipping through her fingers like sand. "Mr. Aldridge," the judge said, turning to my son, "did you knowingly participate in altering these documents?" My boy, my baby who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, couldn't even look at me when he answered. "I thought. She said it was just updating paperwork. Making things simpler." Simpler for whom? Silence stretched across that courtroom like a tightrope. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Judge Morrison closed the file with a sound like thunder. "Emergency injunction granted. All assets, accounts, and properties related to the Aldridge estate are hereby frozen pending full investigation. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate audit of all financial transactions from the past 12 months. The gavel came down like a judge's hammer, and just like that, their perfect crime became their perfect nightmare. My daughter-in-law's phone slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Her lawyer was already gathering papers, probably calculating how much this disaster was going to cost him. But I only had eyes for my son, who finally looked at me with something that might have been recognition. For the first time in days, I could breathe fully. Justice wasn't just a word in law books. Sometimes, if you fought hard enough and kept the right records, it actually happened. But winning the first battle was just the beginning, because now they knew I wasn't the helpless victim they'd counted on. And desperate people do dangerous things when their backs are against the wall. The board meeting was supposed to be her coronation. I wasn't supposed to be there. According to her carefully orchestrated plan, I should have been packing boxes in some cramped apartment across town, disappeared from the family business like I'd never existed at all. Instead, I sat in the back row of the Aldridge Enterprises conference room, watching her perform for an audience that didn't know they were watching a fraud. She'd transformed herself for the occasion. Power suit, diamond jewelry, hair swept back in a style that screamed authority. When she walked to the front of that polished mahogany table, she owned the room, or thought she did. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed her own lies. "Today marks a new chapter for Aldridge Enterprises. We're moving beyond the outdated leadership structures of the past into a more streamlined, efficient future." Board members nodded politely. These were men and women who'd worked with Frank for decades, but they'd been kept in the dark about ownership details. To them, I was just the grieving widow, and she was the dynamic daughter-in-law taking charge during a difficult transition. "The company Frank built was impressive for its time," she continued, "but family businesses can't survive on sentiment. We need leadership that understands modern markets, modern strategies, modern solutions." I almost laughed. Modern solutions like fraud and theft. Like erasing partners to steal their share. Like destroying families for money. Very modern indeed. She clicked through PowerPoint slides showing projected growth, market expansion, strategic partnerships. Every number, every graph, every vision for the future was built on assets she'd tried to steal from me. She was literally selling my own property back to me while pretending I didn't exist. "Questions?" she asked, scanning the room with practiced confidence. That's when the chairman, Robert Chen, Frank's oldest business partner, cleared his throat. "Before we discuss new leadership structures, I'd like to know if all shareholders are present." Her smile flickered for just a moment. "All relevant parties are here, yes." "Including Mrs. Aldridge?" Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt their surprise like a physical force. Most hadn't even noticed me slip in during her presentation. But I'd learned the power of invisibility from years of being overlooked, and sometimes the best weapon is being underestimated. "I'm here," I said quietly, standing up slowly. "And I have something to share with the board." Her face went white. Not pale, white like paper, like death, like someone who'd just seen a ghost they thought they'd buried. Her PowerPoint clicker trembled in her hand. "Corinne," she said, her voice strained with fake sweetness, "this isn't really the appropriate forum for a co-founder to address shareholders." Robert interrupted. "I think it's perfectly appropriate." I walked to the front of that conference room like I was walking to my own resurrection. Behind me, I heard whispers, confusion, the shuffle of papers as board members tried to understand what they were witnessing. From my briefcase, Frank's old leather briefcase that had traveled to 1,000 business meetings, I pulled out the documents that proved everything. Not copies. Not reconstructions. Original papers with original signatures and official seals that couldn't be forged or explained away. "My name is Corinne Aldridge," I said, placing the first document on the table. "And I'm not just Frank's widow. I'm his equal partner and co-founder of every business you see on those slides." The partnership agreement hit that polished table like a bomb going off. My signature beside Frank's, bold as brass and legal as law. The room went completely silent except for the hum of the projector still displaying her stolen dreams. Document after document followed. Bank signature cards. Property deeds. Corporate filings. 30 years of proof that I wasn't the dependent she'd painted me as. I was half owner of everything she'd been trying to steal. "These are the original documents," I continued, my voice steady as stone. "Some of you might have seen copies where my name was removed, my signatures erased, my ownership denied. But paper doesn't lie, and neither do courts of law." I looked directly at her, this woman who'd tried to erase me from my own life story. "The emergency injunction filed yesterday has frozen all assets pending investigation of systematic fraud. Every transfer, every altered document, every attempt to steal what Frank and I built together is now evidence in a federal case." The silence stretched until someone's coffee cup rattled against a saucer. Cell phones started buzzing as the implications sank in. If I owned half of everything, then every decision made without my knowledge, every asset transferred without my consent, every plan built on my exclusion was legally worthless. Her PowerPoint slides still glowed on the wall behind me, but now they looked like what they really were: the fantasies of a thief who'd counted her chickens before they hatched. "The floor is yours," Robert said quietly. But she had no words left. For the first time since I'd known her, the woman who always had an answer, always had a plan, always had control, stood there speechless while her perfectly orchestrated world collapsed around her. What happened next would end this nightmare once and for all, but first, she had one last desperate move to make.
Her lawyer's face looked like he'd swallowed poison. David Sterling, the same expensive shark who'd helped draft my eviction papers, now sat across from me in a conference room that smelled like defeat and desperation. "My clients would like to discuss a settlement," he said, his voice professionally calm despite the chaos we'd unleashed. "To avoid the publicity and expense of protracted litigation." Miriam leaned back in her chair with the satisfaction of a cat who'd caught the canary. "I'm listening." My daughter-in-law sat silent beside her lawyer, a completely different woman than the one who'd evicted me 3 days ago. No designer suit today, just a simple dress and the kind of hollow eyes that come from realizing your perfect crime wasn't so perfect after all. My son looked worse. Dark circles under his eyes, hands that couldn't stay still, the shell-shocked expression of someone who'd discovered his wife had made him an accessory to felony fraud. Every few minutes he'd glance at me like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. "Full withdrawal of all claims to the Aldridge estate," Sterling continued, reading from a prepared statement. "Return of all transferred funds, approximately $2.7 million. Resignation from all corporate positions. And a formal apology for any misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. Miriam's voice could have cut glass. "Is that what we're calling systematic fraud now?" I held up my hand before she could continue. This was my battle, my choice, my ending to write. "What about criminal charges?" I asked quietly. Sterling shifted uncomfortably. "We were hoping that might be unnecessary, given the family relationship and the voluntary nature of the restitution." I looked across that table at the woman who'd tried to erase me. 3 days ago, she'd stood in my living room with an eviction notice and 23 witnesses, confident in her power to destroy my life. Now she couldn't even meet my eyes. "You gave me 12 hours to disappear," I said to her directly. "You planned it for months. The humiliation, the timing, the witnesses, all of it designed to break me down and make me vanish quietly." Her lawyer started to speak, but I cut him off. "You stole my money. You forged my documents. You turned my son against me. You tried to erase 30 years of my life's work." My voice stayed calm, but every word landed like a hammer blow. "And now you want to call it a misunderstanding?" She finally looked up, tears starting to track down her cheeks. "I never meant for it to go this far. We needed the money, and you seemed so lost after Frank died, and I thought." "You thought I was weak," I finished. "You thought I was stupid. You thought I was disposable." She nodded, the admission hanging in the air like smoke. I thought about Frank's voice from that first night in the attic, "Don't let anyone erase what we created together." I thought about my son's silence while she destroyed me in public. I thought about 30 years of building something meaningful, only to watch family try to steal it for their own greed. But I also thought about what justice really meant. Was it punishment for the sake of punishment? Or was it making sure this never happened again? "I'll accept the settlement," I said finally. "Full restitution, resignation from all positions, and public acknowledgement of the fraud. But there's one more condition." Sterling leaned forward. "What's that?" "She signs a confession detailing everything she did, every document she altered, every lie she told. It gets filed with the court as evidence, and if she ever tries anything like this again, with me or anyone else, that confession becomes grounds for immediate prosecution. That's unusual, Sterling said. So was trying to steal from your husband's business partner, Miriam replied dryly. My client is being generous. I watched my daughter-in-law process the choice. Public disgrace and financial ruin, or criminal prosecution and prison time. Not much of a choice, really, but then again, she'd never given me much of a choice either. I'll sign, she whispered. The papers took 20 minutes to prepare. Her confession filled 3 pages. 3 pages of fraud, manipulation, and family betrayal written in her own hand. When she finished signing, her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. Sterling gathered the documents like they were radioactive. This concludes our business, then. But it didn't conclude mine. Because sitting across from me was my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man who'd stayed silent while his wife tried to destroy me. We had our own conversation coming, and it wouldn't be settled with papers and lawyers. The woman who'd tried to erase me was gone, but the son who'd let her try, that wound would take much longer to heal.
My son followed me home in his car, keeping distance like he was afraid I might disappear if he got too close. When we pulled into the driveway of the house that was finally, legally, undeniably mine again, he sat in his driver's seat for a long time before getting out. We stood on the front porch where I'd raised him, where Frank had taught him to ride a bike, where we'd been a family before lawyers and greed and weak choices tore us apart. Mom, he said finally, and his voice cracked like it did when he was 12. I unlocked the door but didn't invite him in. Some conversations needed to happen in thresholds, in spaces between what was and what might be. She's moving back to her mother's in California, he said. Filed for divorce this morning. Says she can't face the shame of staying here. And you? He looked down at his hands I'd bandaged when he fell off that bike, hands that had signed papers stealing from me without bothering to read what they really said. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. He finally met my eyes. Mom, I need you to know, I never wanted to hurt you. She said it was just paperwork, just making things simpler after Dad died. I thought I was helping. By cutting me out completely? She said you were struggling with the business stuff, that it was too much stress for someone your age. She made it sound like we were protecting you. I wanted to feel sorry for him. He was my child, my only family left, and he'd been manipulated by someone who understood his weaknesses better than he did. But I also remembered his silence in that living room while she humiliated me in front of our neighbors. When did you stop trusting me? I asked. The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. After Dad died, he said quietly. You seemed so lost, so fragile. And she was so confident, so sure about everything. She said she was taking care of business so you could just grieve and heal. While she stole everything your father and I built. I know that now. But Mom, she didn't start out evil. The first year, she really did help. Organized the funeral, handled the insurance, managed the transition. I think the money changed her. When she realized how much there was, how much power came with it. And you never questioned why I was being cut out? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. I did question it. But every time I brought it up, she had reasons. Legal reasons, tax reasons, efficiency reasons. She made me feel stupid for not understanding, and she made it seem like including you would just complicate everything. So you chose easy over right. I chose what I thought was best for everyone. I was wrong. He looked up at me, and I saw Frank in his eyes, the same blue, the same intensity when he was trying to make me understand something important. Mom, I lost my dad and then I lost my mind. I let someone else make decisions because making them myself felt too hard. I wanted to stay angry. Anger was clean, simple, easier than forgiveness. But standing there looking at my son, really looking at him for the first time since Frank's funeral, I saw something I'd missed. He wasn't the confident young man I'd raised. He was a lost boy who'd married a woman stronger than he was and let her reshape his entire world. Where does that leave us? I asked. I don't know. I signed papers that tried to steal from you. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I chose her over you when it mattered most. His voice broke completely. I don't know how to fix that. You can't fix it, I said simply. But maybe we can build something new. Hope flickered in his eyes like a candle flame. How? Slowly, carefully, with a lot more talking and a lot less assuming. I stepped back into the doorway. And with you learning to make your own decisions instead of letting other people think for you. Does that mean? It means come back next Sunday for dinner. We'll start there. He nodded, tears making tracks down his cheeks. As he walked back to his car, I realized something that Frank had tried to teach me years ago. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about giving people the chance to become who they should have been all along. But first, I had some thinking to do about who I wanted to be in the next chapter of my life. And that was going to require more than winning court battles. 6 months later, I sat in the same kitchen where this nightmare began, but everything was different now. The eviction notice was gone, replaced by thank you cards from the Eldercare Legal Aid Foundation, the organization I'd started with half of my recovered fortune. The other half? Still sitting safely in accounts only I controlled, a lesson learned about trusting the right people at the right time. My son came for Sunday dinner every week now, just like I'd asked. At first, our conversations were careful, polite, filled with the kind of small talk strangers make. But slowly, meal by meal, we were remembering how to be family again. He was different. Quieter, more thoughtful, less quick to let other people make his decisions. The divorce had been finalized last month, and while it hurt him, I could see relief in his eyes. Relief at being free from someone who'd tried to use his love as a weapon against his family. The foundation helped another woman this week, I told him, over pot roast and mashed potatoes. Elderly widow in Chicago whose stepchildren were trying to steal her house. Took us 3 days to freeze their scheme and get her legal representation. How many is that now? 47 cases in 6 months. Turns out there are a lot of people like your ex-wife out there, and a lot of people like me who get targeted because we seem vulnerable. He set down his fork and looked at me directly. You never seemed vulnerable to me growing up. Because your father was alive then. After he died, I felt lost, confused, overwhelmed by business things I'd let him handle. She saw that weakness and exploited it. I paused. But weakness isn't permanent unless you let it be. After dinner, he helped me wash dishes, something he'd never done as a child, but something he did now without being asked. Small changes, but they mattered. Mom, he said as he dried a plate, I've been thinking about something. What's that? The business. Alderidge Enterprises. You're running it alone now, and it's growing again. But you built it with Dad as a team. Maybe. He hesitated. Maybe it needs to be a team again. I turned to look at him. Are you asking for a job? I'm asking for a chance to learn. To earn back your trust. To work alongside you the way Dad did, as a partner instead of someone who just signs papers he doesn't understand. It was tempting. Having family in the business again, rebuilding what had been broken, moving forward together instead of apart. But I'd learned something important about second chances. They only work when people have actually changed. Tell you what, I said. Spend a year volunteering with the foundation. Learn about elder law, about protecting vulnerable people, about fighting for justice when the system fails. Show me you can put principles before profit, and we'll talk about partnership. He nodded slowly. That's fair. And one more thing. If you ever let someone manipulate you into betraying family again, there won't be a third chance. I love you, but I won't be anyone's victim twice. Understood. After he left that night, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea that actually tasted good again. The house felt like home instead of a prison. The future looked like possibility instead of endings. My phone buzzed with a text from Miriam, new case in Denver. Sounds familiar, greedy in-laws, forged documents, elderly woman who doesn't understand business. Interested. I smiled and typed back, send me the details. Because here's what I learned from 12 hours that changed everything. When someone tries to erase you, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming so strong, so prepared, so unbreakable that you can protect other people from going through what you survived. Frank used to tell me that quiet justice was the sharpest kind. He was right. But sometimes quiet justice grows into something bigger, into movements that change laws, organizations that save lives, legacies that outlast the people who tried to destroy them. That eviction notice had given me 12 hours to get out. Instead, it gave me the rest of my life to fight back. And I was just getting started. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that strength comes from the most unexpected places, then please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We have more powerful stories coming that will inspire you, challenge you, and maybe even change how you see your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs to find their own quiet strength. Together, we're building a community that believes everyone deserves to be heard, valued, and protected. Don't miss the next chapter.